Hey guys, Effie here. Today I'm going to show you how I made this card using our Holiday Love Poinsettia and our Brushed Merry Sentiments stamp set. I'm going to start off by rose gold heat embossing this beautiful poinsettia clutter in two corners of my watercolor paper panel. I'm using Canson XL 140-pound paper, and after I've stamped this beautiful image with some embossing ink, I'm going to just spoon on some of our rose gold embossing powder and hit the whole panel with my heat tool. Next, I'm going to start watercoloring, and I'll be using the wet and wet watercoloring technique. So I'm going to wet the area that I plan on painting first with some clean water, and then I'll do some painting with some Ken Oliver color bursts. For my hues today, I'm using Alizarin Crimson, Merlot, and then I'll be using Turquoise for the leaves and the outline around my poinsettia cluster. After I've wet my panel just a little bit, I'm going to start dropping in a little bit of the alizarin crimson into the inner corners of my petals, and then I'll blend that color out to the edges of the petals. I'm using two water brushes to paint. I'm using one brush to dip into the color burst powder and apply that pigment, and then I'll take that second clean brush to blend the color out. I have a piece of paper towel next to my work area, and I use that to help control the amount of moisture and also the amount of pigment on my brush tip. When you learn how to control the amount of water and pigment on your brush, then you control how light or dark the areas are that you're painting. So while my alizarin crimson areas were still a little wet, I started dropping in a little bit of Merlot to blend into the shading for my poinsettia. While the Merlot didn't diffuse that much, I just took my second clean brush and I kind of just pulled the Merlot out to blend into the alizarin crimson. Once I finish painting my blooms, I'm going to paint my poinsettia leaves with some turquoise color bursts, and I'm using the same wet and wet watercoloring technique, and then I just dropped in the turquoise color burst into the inner corners of my leaves, and then I slightly blended that color out to the edges of the leaves. Once the leaves were done, there are three smaller florals in this cluster, and I just painted those with alizarin crimson and then a little bit of Merlot in the center. Then I'll get started on the area around my cluster, which I'll also paint with the turquoise. Why didn't I do this while I was painting the leaves? Because at the time that I was painting this, I didn't know the direction that I was going to go in. So I was just winging it at this point. I just realized that I wanted more of the turquoise on most of my panel. So I just blended out the color all the way to the opposite ends of this current poinsettia. And when I paint the opposite cluster, I'm going to do the same thing to that. So that way, I'm just going to have a soft wash of turquoise in the center of my panel with deeper concentrations of the turquoise closer to my Holiday Love poinsettias. So when you're creating this kind of wash around your cluster, you want to just move fast and keep working while your panel's still wet, and that way you get a really nice blend. I painted the second poinsettia cluster the same way, so I didn't record that. Next, I'm going to stamp my sentiment. I'll be using this big brushed Merry sentiment, and I'll stamp it in our Ocean Teal dye, which is a deep turquoise dye ink. And I thought that it would look really lovely against that turquoise wash that we created earlier. So once I've stamped this brushed Merry onto some white cardstock, while that dye ink was still a little bit wet, I'm going to just spoon on a little bit of gold glitter embossing powder to the bottom half of my sentiment. Now, the thing with dye ink is that it doesn't dry right away. The powder will stick to the dye ink. So one trick when you're using gold or any glitter embossing powder, actually, heat up your panel from behind, and that way you'll have less glitter flying everywhere. So once I finished doing my little stardust effect, I like to call it, I'm going to die cut the Merry using the coordinating die, and then I'll take the largest die from our double stitch large rectangles collection, and I'll die cut my poinsettia panel into an A2 size panel with some stitching at the edges. Then I'll take our double-sided adhesive, which I've trimmed into strips, and I'll adhere that panel onto a top folding A2 card base. Next, I'm going to pop up my sentiment onto my base, and then I created the Christmas sentiment, and that is just from the same brushed Mary set, and I just rose gold heat embossed it onto some black cardstock, and I trimmed the sentiment strip. And then lastly, I just used some foam squares to pop it up over the brushed Mary. And my project is now complete. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel because I update it on a weekly basis. As always, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.